KAPOS were Jewish inmates at Nazi concentration camps. They were assigned to assist the Nazis in overseeing other inmates. They were given the responsibility to protect their lives and try to protect the prisoners in their block. They gained rights that other prisoners did not have, such as access to more food, cleaner housing quarters, and warmer clothing. Hitler served in World War I. In 1924, Hitler was sentenced to 5 years in prison after 3 months of trial for trying to overthrow Germany's government, but served only 9 months. He established the Gestapo and the SS as his personal bodyguards. In Hitler's mind, the Jewish population was responsible for all evil and needed to be annihilated. He described them as destroyers of culture, a menace, and a parasite to humanity. Auschwitz opened on May 20th, 1940. The initial intent for Auschwitz was to be a detention center for political prisoners. Auschwitz eventually became the largest killing center of all the Nazi camps. Most prisoners were subjected to gas chambers, slave labor, and some to barbaric medical experiments led by Joseph Mengele. During World War II, more than 1 million Jewish people lost their lives at Auschwitz. The SS treated them like they were worthless, and at the Nuremberg trials, some even testified that they believed that the Jewish life had no value or meaning to the world. The SS treated the Jewish people with the most ruthless cruelty. Nazi soldiers often regarded a Jewish life as the least valuable of all. Hitler saw them as political and racial enemies, so he called the SS to murder and remove them. At the Nuremberg trials, it came to light that the SS were specifically charged with the leadership of the final solution, which was to murder all European Jews. Very few survived because of the harsh labor and the death blocks. There were 9 million people of the Jewish faith in Europe at the start of the war, and only 3 million by the end of the war. A lot of rights were taken away from Jewish prisoners when they were put into concentration camps. For example, many basic human rights were taken away, such as the freedom from torture. Because Jews were tortured, their population dwindled, causing a lot of people to lose the Jewish faith. Freedom of religion. Those of the Jewish faith could no longer go to church or practice their religion without being beaten. Freedom of speech. The Jews could not speak, so they couldn't tell people about their religion, which caused people to lose sight of the Jewish faith because they were scared that something was going to happen to them. The right to public facilities. Jews were not allowed to go to public places, so they couldn't be seen or known about, causing many people to leave the Jewish faith, making their population decrease. In Auschwitz, functionary prisoners, otherwise known as a kapo, were granted many rights that were taken away from other prisoners. They were given the ability to live without the same brutality in the camp. Some of the rights granted to kapos were superior sleeping quarters, no harsh labor jobs, the correct clothing for the seasons, extra food, and they were allowed to keep some personal possessions. Multiple objects were later found in kapo women's blocks. In the sleeping quarters, the beds were singles and not bunk beds. There were 2 types of kapos: the ones who were ruthless and cruel, just like officers, malicious kapos, and the ones who tried to help fellow prisoners, good kapos. Kapos were responsible for inspecting every inmate in their block to make sure that they met the required work capacity and were to stop any attempts of escaping the camp. If a functionary prisoner was caught trying to be nice, they were dismissed and put through physical beatings and were put back to work with the other prisoners. The majority of kapos were hated by fellow prisoners and other Jews. That was the point. The scheme of using fellow prisoners as guards came straight from Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust. The forming of kapos was a cost-saving measure. If prisoners policed themselves, fewer SS officials were needed to oversee the camps. This was also a tactic to create unrest and tension between the prisoners and helped weaken the community. A kapo got special privileges. However, once the officers were not satisfied with them, they would go back to being regular prisoners, and they knew they would be targeted in the blocks and killed by fellow inmates. After the Holocaust, there were many so-called kapo trials, from 1950 until 1972. After the Holocaust, there was a global responsibility to make sure justice was served for those who were tortured and survived. Most importantly, justice was served to those who didn't survive. It was a grave responsibility to make sure that everyone was punished for causing such mass destruction. Many generals were charged with crimes against humanity, war crimes, crimes against peace, and conspiracy. 24 generals were put on trial at the Nuremberg trials, and 12 were hung. 5 were found innocent, 3 didn't show, and 3 were sentenced to life imprisonment. Kapos were considered traitors to the Jewish people. Hundreds of functionary prisoners were condemned by their fellow prisoners. Upon their liberation of the camps, and several were prosecuted after the war by tribunals in Israel and abroad. Repeatedly in the trials, witnesses described Jewish functionaries as behaving as badly or worse than Nazi Germans. One went as far as saying one feared the defendant like he feared Hitler. At the trials, some witnesses portrayed Kapos as Nazi in the hope of getting the courts to judge them harshly. Some prisoners suffered more beatings and worse harassment from Jewish Kapos than from Nazi Germans. Appa Moshenberg stated there were days where she didn't see a German in the camp. Another witness stated that a German had saved him from a Kapo. It was said that Yehezkel Youngster would strike anywhere and everywhere. Witness during the trial, David Lekovich, described Youngster's actions in the camp as, if a person did not jump from his bed with the required speed, he struck him with his stick. If he found a bed not made exactly as it should be, he would hit him with his stick. If he found a pair of shoes not lined up precisely, he would strike. Youngster took on qualities that were usually associated with the German guards. Since the prisoners were beaten so much by Youngster, they had lost their morale and died. In January 1952, Youngster's verdict was delivered. With a lack of valid evidence of death and full proof of the beatings, the judges cleared him of all war crimes and murder charges. Youngster was found guilty on crimes against humanity after multiple months and was eventually sentenced to death. 2 Kapos, Yehezkel Youngster and Yaakov Honigman, were just a couple who were dubbed as malicious Kapos. Zigovich testified that Honigman was not forced to be, but he chose to be. The verdict on Honigman was delivered at the beginning of 1952. With a lack of valid proof of death and lack of direct testimony regarding the washroom beatings, doubt was instilled in the judges' minds, and the murder charges were dismissed, as well as war crimes, and he was also cleared from all crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison, but it was reduced to 6.5, the longest prison sentence ever given in the trials. Not all Kapos were bad, though. Tivzi Skrimler is an example of a good Kapo. At the trials, Skrimler did admit that he had chosen to work for the Germans. He said, "Because I knew that a Vorarbeiter did not work, and that was splendid for me." He could have chosen not to work for the Germans, countering Honigman and Youngster's argument saying he did have the choice to work for the Germans. He admitted to beating prisoners, but only when he thought the Germans would inflict a harsher punishment. If required to beat a prisoner, he would take them to the hut, hit the table, and command them to scream. Skrimler even admitted to helping Jews carry out prohibited food transactions with non-Jews. Skrimler was proven innocent and went to live a regular life. Being called a Kapo is one of the harshest insults someone of the Jewish faith can say to another. It is an accusation of betrayal of self and people. Today, people are using the term Kapo very carelessly when it is a serious insult that was used during the Holocaust. A current author, Howard Lavie, said, "I've seen it used for every Jew who doesn't support Trump. It's rooted in political nastiness. I think it has less to do with my position as a Jew and more my position politically on the spectrum in the United States." End quote. Some are calling any Jew a Kapo for supporting any positive coverage on Kamala Harris. The responsibility of being a Kapo helped them gain many civil and human rights that were denied to other prisoners. Kapos were hated because of what they did, what they had to do to survive. The responsibility of keeping themselves alive and keeping generals happy took a lot of their time, causing them to react cruelly to other inmates. The Kapo trials were a way to try and serve justice. Many future rights were created to make sure that all people are treated equitably.